Hello. Today, what you guys are going to do is take some of the stuff from last week, so your graphs of sine and cosine and tangent, and you are going to be creating the equations from those. So I've sort of built in a little bit of structure, and you have to fill in that structure, and I'm just going to show you how you can do that for your assignment today. So in here, again, you're going to be having to decide whether you have a sine graph, a cosine graph, or a tangent graph, sort of based on its shape, and then also filling in its amplitude, vertical shift, and then the b value based on its period. Remember, it's not exactly the period here. So here's an example here, and every one of your questions will look the same. You got your three types of functions that it could possibly be, then you're trying to match the graph that's up above here. So if I were to take a look at this graph, right, I can notice the shape of it. It's got to either be sine or cosine. It's definitely not a tangent shape. And I also see that it's starting in the middle of that graph, right? It's starting in the middle here at that axis. So that tells me it's a sine graph in here. So I'm going to grab this sine function and pull it over here. That's my equation that I'm going to choose to fill in, right? I want the sine graph. The other two, I know that's not it. And then I have to kind of decide here. Now, if it's a little tough to see what those numbers are, you can always click on this and grab one of the corners, and make it a little bit bigger so we can see it some here, right? I see that the middle, or the vertical shift, has been shifted up 1. So I know that when I go back to fill in my vertical shift, that's what's added at the end here. Now, again, I put instructions here. You do have to double click to get access into those green boxes there. So I'm going to put a +1 because that was adding 1 on that part. On here, I also see that from the middle, it's gone up 1, 2, 3, and gone down 1, 2, 3. So that way I know that the amplitude is also 3. So I'm going to double click here and put my 3 in. And now the last part is I need to figure out what is the b value in here. So I need to take a look at what's the period. So I notice that starting here, it makes one full wave all the way up, down, and back around again to about, I think this is 360 here. I think the other ones, I made sure that it, follows those. This one here just looks a little different, but that's out to 360 right there. So I don't have to change the period at all, right? I didn't divide by anything. So in this case here, I'm just going to put a 1 because that would be the same as dividing by 1. It didn't change. So that would be my equation now for this graph, right? So that's that's one of them. I'm going to go over 2 more examples. If you're feeling like, hey, this makes sense, and you want to jump through to the rest of them, you can certainly do that at this time. On here, this one, I would take a look at this graph and say, okay, again, it's either sine or cosine, but it is starting in the middle here at a high point, right? If I make this a little bigger, it's starting at a high point, right? That means it's a cosine graph. Okay? Other than the sine graphs always start in the middle, cosine graphs always start at the high one. So I know this is going to be a cosine graph. I'm going to pull that one in there. And I'm going to take a look at these. Vertical shift, it's moved down 1, and its amplitude from the middle here, 1, 2, 3, 4, went up 4. I'll check on the bottom, middle, 1, 2, 3, 4. It also went down 4. So that means I know that the amplitude is 4, and the vertical shift is not 1, but -1 because it went downward. So make sure to include any negatives if they're supposed to be negative as well. And then I have to check here to see what the period is, and so I can adjust the b value. And here the period is, it starts up here, and how long does it take to get back to the top again? So it goes down, all the way down, all the way back up. So there's one full wave right there. That only takes 180 degrees to do that. Normally, cosine should take 360 degrees to do that. So that means it must have been 360 divided by something to get 180. That something, if we kind of figure that out, has to be 2. 360 divided by 2 is 180. So that would work out. And there's my equation filled in for this graph. And one more example here to show you. And this one here, I would take a look at that shape. That is definitely a tangent graph. It is not sine or cosine. So I'm going to pull my tangent graph over here. And if you want to, I'm going to double click this so I can make this a little smaller. If you double click, you can crop the picture so that it doesn't show quite as much if you don't want that stuff, right? So I'm going to double click here. So I don't really care about the extra tangent graphs. I just need the very middle one. to make my determination about the equation. So now I can zoom in on this a little bit more and kind of see what's going on. And so in here, the tangent graph, yeah, my vertical shift, it's gone up 2. Yeah, so that I know my vertical shift is 2. I know that the period here is, a full 180 degrees, right? Again, tangents kind of goes halfway, but we got to measure all the way across. And tangent is normally 180 degrees. It's a little different from sine and cosine that way. So that means, oops, not 12, 1. We didn't have to change the period. We didn't divide by anything. We just divide by 1. Didn't change anything there. So this one is exactly the same as what it should be. And then the last piece here, I need to find its amplitude. So again, tangent, we go halfway over here, and then, we go up a certain amount. So this is backwards, right? It's upside down what it normally should be. It should be going this way if we had a positive amplitude. It'd start low here, and end high over here. So it has a value of 2, because notice it's gone up 2 from this middle point, but it's backwards. So I've got to put in here, got to make sure to put -2 in that case. I'll make this a little bigger because those negatives don't quite fit in there. So that has to be -2 in that case there. And so there's my equation for this tangent graph. And so I'm going to make that smaller. Again, you don't have to make these smaller here if you don't want to, but there is what that tangent graph is. So there's a few examples on how to do the sine graph, cosine graph, tangent graph. You have about 10 questions, I think, to kind of go through again, pick those graphs, fill in the pieces. If you do have questions, send me an email or post a comment on the side there. Oh, excuse me, I'm just hiccuping a little bit. But other than that, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.